Welcome to Lesson 3 of Landscape Design. I'm Arensberg. I'll tell you guys like I tell you every week. If you guys missed week 1 and 2, you can go back and watch those videos now. You definitely need both of those lessons to bring you up to speed for Lesson 3. Today we're going to talk about plants. We're going to talk about plants in a little different way than maybe you're expecting because there's so many different hardiness zones, which is plants that will live in the area where you live, and so many different styles that it's hard to cover every single plant and their conditions. So there's going to be a lot of relying on you to be able to learn what plants will work in your environment as far as sun requirements, water requirements, and if they bloom the color that you're interested in having in your landscape. So keep that in mind. There's going to be a little bit of footwork on your end to be able to determine what plants will work for you. But as an overall rule, there is tons of information to teach you guys about the basics of how to decide what shape a plant is going to be and how big it's going to get and all that in your space. Okay, that's the design part of things. I always tell people that design is those elements and style is the specifics, right? So good design should never be compromised. Good design is height and texture and all of those things, and then the style is the color that you choose, the specific plants that you choose and all that. So keep that in mind when we're going along. I've mentioned in videos previous that you need to have your photos on your phone or your tablet or something that you can reference right here at your desk as you work. So I have that here today. You guys know that this is an imaginary plan, an imaginary house that I just kind of drew up, and I don't really have pictures here of it, but we're going to pretend anyway. You'll have your pictures here for your purposes so that you guys can draw your own landscape plan. All right, let's get started. I'm going to erase my lines that I drew last week, which were pencil lines. Not last week, this is yesterday we did this plan. And we've drawn in our landscape bed lines. Some of you may have straight bed lines, some of you may have curvy bed lines. I have a curvy bed line that looks like a mustache, and that's where we're starting. Okay, first things first, let's talk about corners. Corners are the place where you can get away with doing some larger plant material that isn't going to like crawl up into windows. Typically windows on houses are not on corners. Now if you have an exception to that rule, don't do large things on the corners, but just know that you'll be able to start off with your corners. So I'm going to do that here. I don't have any windows on my corners because I do have my windows drawn in. In general, I like to keep the plants that I put on the corners larger, but also know that those are your anchor plants, and those are going to be the things that we still have to make sure that they're capping out around 6 feet-ish, depending on how tall your house is. You don't want a plant that's going to get 15 feet and be grown all up on your roof line and all that. So just be real careful also about how big the plants are going to get that you're choosing. I love to put an evergreen shrub on the corner of houses because it will be green year-round and it will keep the established edges to the house all the time, and the leaves won't fall off and all that good stuff. Do you guys know the difference between deciduous and evergreen? Deciduous means that the plant loses its leaves during the winter time. So like hydrangeas, what other plants are deciduous? We're going to go with hydrangeas because I can't think of any other ones at this very moment. Evergreen are going to be camellias, azaleas. I'm naming all these southern plants, so, and you may not be in the south, but gardenias, boxwoods are evergreen. So you get the idea. And you want to have, in this landscape plan, you want to have a mix of evergreen and deciduous because you want your landscape to look like something's happening in the wintertime and that everything isn't just like flat and dead. So make sure that you're creating that mix. So we're going to start on the corners with your evergreen. Don't have to do evergreen if you're not dying to. I love a Japanese maple on a corner, a dwarf Japanese maple. But for this demonstration, we're going to do evergreen. So make sure that you're scaling it correctly, right? We want to make sure that that evergreen shrub is probably going to be about 6 feet wide at its widest. So when you draw that in, give it that space that we've scaled out for it, so that you know that the next plant that you put in can't be shoved up right next to it. All right, here's a super important rule of thumb that I want you guys to know. This has to do with the style that we're going back to. As a rule of thumb, I do not put in more than 2 layers of plants. I know people love to do like tall and medium and short. That will maximize your maintenance. If you really want to cut down on maintenance, you want to cut down on the number of layers, depth layers of plants that you have. So maybe something evergreen and taller, and then something deciduous in front of it. Super simple. Keep it simple, guys. We don't need for our landscapes to be like, they're going to be cute when you install them, but I'm going to tell you, if you're not a maintenance person and you put in 3 layers or 4 and 5 layers of plants, it's going to end up looking crazy really quick. So let's keep it really simple. All right, we've got our corners here. Another thing I like to do is upon your entrance into your house, I like to have a little pop of color. And usually I'll do that with like a seasonal color or a perennial. I like seasonal color, annuals, in other words, because down in the deep south, I can plant them twice a year and they just show off and they bloom the entire season with only having to buy plants and replace them twice a year. Very low maintenance. So I'm gonna put those in right here in the front as you're coming up to the house. Right in the corners of the landscape beds, right here, right here in the corners. We're gonna put those in. So there we have it. We have your outside evergreen, we have your seasonal color. Now, you can see here, we've got the front of this house and we've got some windows. You've got 2 windows. I'm gonna imagine that those windows are 3 feet off the ground, okay? If they're 3 feet off the ground, that means that we need a plant that is not gonna get any taller than the bottom of that window, because I don't like to see those shrubs hit over the window, right? So maybe we'll do a dwarf gardenia, because I'm imagining that this landscape has a like a part sun, part shade situation for our front yard, right? So I'm gonna put in some gardenias. How many gardenias do we do? Do you guys know the answer? I know I don't have an audience that's live looking at me here, but the answer is always odd numbers. You guys make sure that you're putting in odd numbers into this landscape. So I have put 3 dwarf gardenias here underneath these 2 windows. Again, creating symmetry from side to side. It's like the old, was it algebra? My husband teaches algebra, I don't even know if that's the rule. What you do to one side, you do to the other. Nate, do you know? Is it? So we're putting 3 gardenias on one side and 3 gardenias on the other. Make sure when you're drawing these things in that you're keeping them to scale so you know how to space them, but also that you're naming them as you go, because it is very easy to forget what you put in what spot. And you can always go back and change them later if you decide to do that. So I'm going to label these as dwarf gardenia and seasonal color. And let's go ahead and decide what we're going to put on these corners, because we haven't talked about it yet. We just said evergreen shrub, but I'm going to name it, let's go with a little gem magnolia. I like to use junipers really often too, like a Brody juniper, which gets tall and stays evergreen as well. All right, so we've got some of our plants going. Now, we're gonna pull back into some of these little areas here. You see I've got these kind of straight here, and so we've got a little bit of space up front that we can still put something. But we'll come back to that in a minute. We're gonna go back into these spaces. Now, when I have corners like this, I like to do little groups of 3 triangular spaced, or not triangular shaped plants, but triangular spaced out. So we'll put 1 in the corner, and then we'll come out from it and we'll put 1, 2 to make a triangle. So now we've got these 3 plants making that corner here in this space. And you know what those could be? Those could be hydrangeas, and those are deciduous. So again, we're going back. We've got our seasonal color that we're going to replace during twice a year if you're in the south. We've got our gardenias that are evergreen, and then we've got these 3 hydrangea here, and those are going to be deciduous. So we've got a mix of both right now. So I'm going to label those, again, subject to change, possibly. Okay, and then we've got So those hydrangeas are right here by this window. Maybe we'll choose a smaller hydrangea. And then we've got another window here and we've got a blank spot in between. So we have an opportunity to do something a little taller because maybe our house is brick and we've got this big blank wall that we want to fill up a little bit. So maybe we'll put something that's got a little bit of height to it there. So I'll put a single thing in the center there, and then maybe underneath this window we'll do some maybe something with a little visual texture in a variegated, keeping with our odd numbers. We'll do maybe like a variegated Dianella, which is a variegated flax lily. So if you can start to visualize what this would look like, you've got your tall on the side, your super small here by the front walkway, you've got kind of a short height here underneath this window, a little taller in the corner to create some height there in this corner, tall in the center, and then super small next to this, this window. And then once you've got one side, you can go and replicate it symmetrically as you can on the opposite side. Now remember, this house is not symmetrical. It is very different from side to side. There's a different number of windows and there's more space between windows and things like that. But we're gonna go back and try to create that same symmetry on this side with similar plants. And you can see too that I've only got one layer of plants. Really and truly, so much of the time I just use one layer of plants. Okay, so we're gonna try to go back and create some symmetry over here. We've got our, so we've got a little more bed depth on this side, so maybe I'll do a little bit of Dianella up front, like I did on the opposite side. You know what, I'm just gonna add a couple more. I'll just add more of them. Same plant, just more. And then we're gonna add our hydrangea here in that corner, because we have a corner on this side. And we don't have a wall to do a taller plant here, so we're gonna skip that on this side and maybe do something that's just a little smaller, like an encore azalea or something like that. That's gonna have that same evergreen leaf, but is not gonna detract from the simplicity and the balance from side to side. Now, I know a lot of people are really into having a cottagey style garden. We see them all the time in magazines and they look really beautiful because they are photographing them at their peak when they're like everything's blooming, it looks beautiful. I can tell you from experience that that is the highest maintenance landscape that you can ever put in. But if you want the look of a cottagey garden, which this is not, this is very much like a foundation type landscape that you would see on any home, what you can do is to mass plant things. And what that means is choose a palette of maybe 8 plants, just mix it together, those perennials, the deciduous and all those things, and then plant them in large groups rather than layers and layers like we talked about that's high maintenance. Plant them in big masses. So a big mass of roses, a big mass of irises, a big mass of plumbago or something like that. So you're having these big patches of color that overall creates the look that you're going for with much less maintenance. So that's a little bit different than what we've done here, but you get the idea. So there we have it, guys. We've created this little landscape that goes across the front of this foundation. We've got our different heights and textures. I'm gonna go back and kind of draw these all in so you guys can see how they're not highlighted, but the different plant symbols, and name them for yourself. And it's really just that simple, guys. Again, the legwork is really gonna take place on you learning the plants that are gonna take, that are going to work in your space with your sun and your water and all that good stuff. That's going to be the real legwork here. Once you can learn some of those things and kind of get a running list of what you can use in your space, you can pop in these elements super, super quickly. So just remember, do not make sure that you're spacing out your plants correctly, using your odd numbers. Don't try to shove too many plants in a spot. Whatever its mature size is, space them out to that spacing when you plant them and when you design them. You do not want them to be too close together. I know you guys want an instant landscape, but it needs time to get mature and to grow. So space them out correctly. And that's it, guys. That's all I got for you. That's lesson 3. Again, share with your friends and family. Make sure that they are enjoying these lessons too if they're interested in landscape design. And if you have any questions, because I think this is probably the one that's going to get the most number of questions, make sure to comment below. I will be here to answer all of your questions so that we can move forward next week to final details. All right, I'll see you guys next week for the next lesson.